Please welcome Lawrence Hill. What a run, huh? What an amazing run you're on right now.
It's unbelievable, 2-year run.
God, so the book comes out and gets lots of accolades, and now there's even more stories. It's as if the book, continues to make news for you. Now, it's been optioned for a film?
It has. It's Conquering Lions Productions with Clement Virgo and Damon D'Oliveira. So they made Rude and Poor Boy's Game and Lie With Me.
Clement making Poor Boy's Game, that's the kind of film that when you watch that, makes you think that this book is right in his wheelhouse.
That's exactly what I thought. I was watching that recently and set in Nova Scotia, and I thought he understands the story and he can tell the Book of Negroes well. So I'm glad it's in his hands. I'm sure he'll do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked a lot about the book because a lot of people have asked you about it, but in your mind, as it's been a couple of years, how would you sum up the book now for people who haven't got to read it?
Well, really, it's a story of a woman's life in the 18th century, moving back and forth across the ocean. She's abducted as a child from her village in Africa, taken into slavery, and late in life gets herself free and goes back to Africa, hoping to go back to the village from which she was stolen as a child. So it's back and forth across the ocean in the 18th century, a woman's story.
And the title Book of Negroes is, from the fact that there was a book that's a document, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, this history is so forgotten and so dramatic, but in 1783, at the end of the Revolutionary War, 3,000 blacks flee from Manhattan, where they've been serving the British on the losing side of the American Revolutionary War, and they come to Nova Scotia. And they come full of hope and expectation that they'll meet with freedom and integration and security, and of course they don't. But before they can come, they're registered in this British document called the Book of Negroes. So it's a living, breathing, historic document kept in the National Archives in the UK, just 18 miles from Buckingham Palace. Mm-hmm. And so that's the source of the title.
Yeah, and the book is pretty... The actual document, the Book of Negroes, it's not just names. It's comments.
It's comments. The pages are about this big, 3,000 names, 150 pages, broken down no good, or left eye running, left leg sore, something like that. It's a really tragic account of the plight of 3,000 people who'd served the Americans first as slaves, and then served the British once they ran away from slavery, served the British during the war, and then came to Nova Scotia.
I mean, your family was a civil rights activist, right?
Yeah.
And I know that came to Canada in 1953, like the day after they got married?
The day after they married in D.C.
So your father, from what I understand, and you and your brother Dan was a great songwriter. You guys are great storytellers, and your dad was a great storyteller, right?
He was.
When you did the research to talk about this part of the black experience in North America, it's sort of related to the kinds of conversations your old man would have with you when you were growing up.
Well, the core is that he knew how to tell a story. He knew how to withhold detail, deliver a good punchline. He knew when to give you what you needed to know and when to hold it back. He didn't really know that much about the story of the Black Loyalists, and I didn't really dig into this novel until after he died. But the idea of telling stories that are forgotten and of sort of riveting a listener with history in an exciting way, I certainly learned from my dad and from my mom, who's still with us.
Yeah, and the idea of how the black experience has obviously changed a lot since the Loyalist days, but in a sense there are some things, like a lot of people in Canada don't realize that this country doesn't have the best reputation. They think that this is the Underground Railroad country, which it was to a degree, but the first non-whites native race riot had to do with, in the east coast of Canada.
Yeah, first race riot in Canada has to do with blacks who were being rioted against by disgruntled white loyalists in Shelburne and Birchtown, Nova Scotia, 1784. And, of course, the Underground Railroad is a great story for us because we can give ourselves a pat on the back for the wonderful job we feel we did. But the story of slavery is often untold in Canada. The story of the plight of the black loyalists in Nova Scotia is also often untold. And I wanted to go after some of these stories, not to sort of rub salt in wounds. It's not about blame, but just about the excavation of history and the celebration of history that we often prefer to forget.
I think you actually become a better version of yourself if you can understand where you came from, right?
Yeah, and not sort of bury our heads in the sand. And it's so great to point that accusatory finger at those nasty Americans and all the dastardly things they've done. So to confront our own history is healthy.
People are watching in America now. We're on in Detroit and in Seattle, some northern New York towns. If you go to the bookstore and you look for a book called Book of Negroes, you're not going to find it because it's not called Book of Negroes in America.
No, because if you use the word Negroes in say D.C. or Brooklyn, you're going to get your nose broken. And so, as you probably should. Yeah. I mean, it's true here too. But on the street in black culture in the States and in Toronto, if you really dig, Negro has a specific meaning inside black culture. It means a person these days. It means a person who's sort of a weak-kneed, inauthentic, spineless person with no self-pride as a black person. person. And that meaning has evolved on the street over the last 15 or 20 years. So the Americans, no way they were going to that title. They insisted on the title change at the last minute, so I had to come up with a new title for the American edition.
So if they're looking in a bookstore there, they'll find...
Someone Knows My Name, and also in Australia and New Zealand.
Someone Knows My Name. I suppose what's neat about that is that's a big part of the slave experience as well, is the idea of hearing a name.
And the loss of name, and the loss of identity. And so many African peoples, their names weren't even recognized by the time they came to Canada in slavery or the States. There was no name, there was no history, you had no past, you were there and that was it. And so Someone Knows My Name sort of recognizes the idea of name, the idea of a life underneath chains. You know.
I understand why you did it from the perspective of a woman. That makes sense. I've read another interview with you where you said a woman had the most to lose in that situation, a midwife who could lose her own kids. But I wondered for you, even though you're an experienced writer, to write the woman's perspective, what was that like for you?
Well, scary. For one thing, I wondered, were people pilloring me?
Yeah.
You know, would I be just ripped apart for even thinking about writing in the voice of an 18th century African woman?
So you weren't like Jack Nicholson, As Good as It Gets, it says you take a man, but you remove all accountability and ration. It wasn't like that?
No, I don't think so. No, you know, I sometimes joke that the way I got into the voice was a whole lot of cross-dressing, but that's not really true. It was really just a question of imagining that she was my daughter. I gave her my daughter's middle name. I thought of her as my child, and I asked myself, if this had been my daughter, and she'd been drawn into this situation, which any of us could have been drawn into if we'd been born in the wrong time, in the wrong place, how would she have survived?
Now, when you spend time getting into the head of a fictitious character, but it comes from a place like your daughter, I wonder if that gives you a different understanding of your daughter, or opens doors in a way that you'll understand, you know, the other women in your life.
I think so. I mean, that's why you're right. You're right to understand. The reason it's so hard, even after 7 books, it's hard to write because you don't know what you're doing, because you're trying to figure out something that you don't understand. So you're right to make your way through this murky water. So sure, I feel I emerged from the process with a better understanding of the world, of myself, of my daughter, and of the nature of love, and really of the nature of the human heart, you know, and how it gets through these terrible times. And how is it that some ordinary people go through the worst things imaginable and still keep on going? Don't lose their minds, don't become murderous or suicidal, don't become so embittered that they can't love life anymore. They keep on trucking. I think that's a miracle of human nature.
But the question is how then? If the question is how? You know, well, when you get to this point,
well,
what
I
do you
don't know,
think?
because some people just totally fall apart. Yeah. So how is it that person A just completely collapses, maybe loses the capacity of speech, or jumps over the edge of the ship, or kills somebody, or just hates so much they can never crawl out of their own hate? And the person beside them goes on and wants to live in love. And I think it comes down to the resilience and the inner core strength. In her case, I think Aminata, that's the name of the hero, she's thinking of her parents. When she's stolen when she's 11, so she's old enough to remember who she is and where she's come from, and young enough to be naive enough to have the faint hope of going home one day. She always wants to go back home.
You mentioned that the Book of Negroes is not that far from Buckingham Palace. In some weird twist of fate, all of a sudden you meet the Queen of England.
Yeah, well, she likes to meet the winner of the Commonwealth Writers Prize. So when I was lucky enough to win that last year, after going to South Africa, I went to London, to Buckingham Palace. So she made me think of my mother a little bit. Yeah. Although my mother's an anti-monarchist because she's an American. Right. So Americans, on the whole, don't really like the idea of a monarchy very much. But she's in her 80s, and she's smart as a whip, a great conversationalist. She made me feel quite relaxed.
What did you guys talk about?
Well, she's got these dogs, these corgis, and so they were lying around outside.
They were just hanging around?
They're hanging around like they own the rug, and you know you're not going to step on a royal dog. Like, you're not going to do that. Right. So you walk around them, and you sit down, and she's got this little button on a little table, a little silver button. And when she's had enough of you, her hand starts going toward this button. And when it goes down, you're out of there. The security guards come in. Really? So I tried to get more interesting as her hand got toward this button. She'd pull her hand back.
What a weird kind of approval-based meeting that is.
Scheherazade.
That's so Mike Myers in Austin Powers, isn't it?
Or I was thinking Scheherazade. You tell a story a little better, and you get to stay a little longer. And so, but I liked her. And so we had about 20 minutes up in her apartments on the 2nd floor of Buckingham Palace.
Now, do you have to win another Commonwealth Prize to see her again? Or?
I think so. Yeah, she's not going to see me without that, so I better keep writing.
The Book of Negroes is out now in paper book. It's across Canada. You can get it there. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Good to see you. Thank you.